Hello all and welcome to Scholar Strike Canada, two-day labor action of online teachings and actions. My name is Beverly Bain of Scholar Strike Canada. I'm also a faculty at the U of T, UTM campus in the Department of Historical Studies, Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies program. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are broadcasting the teachings from Scholar Strike from Toronto to Toronto on the traditional ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. This territory is covered by Treaty 13, the Williams Treaties, and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. We must note that the Canadian state has never upheld their obligations under these treaties. The very inception of Canada has been marked by the violent dispossession of Indigenous peoples and the brutal enslavement of African peoples. The colonial violence and settler colonial violence is ongoing to this day. We are gathering here today as part of our obligation to take care of each other, the land, and the creatures we share it with. Today, Scholar Strike Canada call on all faculty, students, and staff across the country to refuse academic business as usual over the next 2 days and instead follow the teachings, discussions, and participate in the various actions taking place against social abandonment. Over the last 3 weeks, we have witnessed the escalation of Israel attacks on the Palestinian people and the issuing of statements from our university administrations and ministers in government that scolded, threatened with the intention of intimidating faculty, students, and staff who continue to express support for the Palestinian people in Gaza living under Israeli occupation. We also see recently many Jews, Indigenous, Palestinians, Blacks, African, Middle Eastern, Arabs, Asians, queer and trans people around the world together in this moment are refusing to be silent on the genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza taking place. Instead, they are demanding that Israel end its war against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Many of our academics have canceled speaking engagements with organizations and institutions that continue to maintain support for the hateful rhetoric from governments, institutions, and individuals that support Israel in its attack against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Scholar Strike Canada unequivocally express our support for the Palestinian people in Gaza and call for an immediate end to the war on Palestine and an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestine now. I'll now turn to the introduction of what you can expect today. We will open with our panel on Against Social Abandonment, the University and the World. We will also have panels running throughout the day. At 2:15, Refusing the Neoliberal Carrot, Academic Precarity and Solidarity. 2:25, On Settling Borders, Translations, Intimate Labors. At 3:55 p.m., Confronting Police and Their Clients. And running concurrently with that is Militarized Cities, Sites of Resistance and Counter-Knowledges. Big thanks to the Scholar Strike Canada Organizing Committee for all their work on putting together this labor action. Thank you to our funders, our faculty, students, and staff and supporters everywhere for your bravery and steadfastness in supporting freedom and liberation for all. Thank you to Pro Bono ASL Services for providing interpretation, and welcome to our interpreting team, Selena Flowers and Tim Lane, who will be with us over the next 2 days. Most of all, a big thank you to our followers who will be with us over the 2 days of the labor action. I'll now turn to introducing our opening panel. Nala Abdu is an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist feminist activist and Chancellor's Sociology Carleton University professor. She has extensive publications on gender, racialized capitalism, nationalism, and the settler colonial state, focusing on Palestine, now Israel, and Turtle Island, now Canada. Among her many publications is one of her most recent, Inside the Leviathan, Palestinian Experiences in Israel, in Israeli Universities. Courtney Sky is Mohawk Turtle Clan from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. She is co-director of Protect the Tract, a Haudenosaunee-led project to promote the moratorium on development along the Haldimand Tract, and a research fellow at the Yellowhead Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University. AJ Withers has been a community organizer for over 2 decades. They are the author of Fight to Win Inside Poor People's Organizing, Disability Politics and Theory, and co-author of A Violent History of Benevolence, Interlocking Oppression in the Moral Economies of Social Working. They are the Ruth Woodward Junior Chair of the Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies Department. Ronaldo Walcott is a professor and the chair of Africana and American Studies at the University of Buffalo. He is the author of On Property and the Long Emancipation. Gary Kinsman is an independent scholar and is part of the No Pride in Policing Coalition. They are the author of The Regulation of Desire, Queer Histories, Queer Struggles, 3rd edition. Each panelist will speak in the order they have been introduced. Then we'll have questions and discussions with panelists, which will follow after their short presentations. So I'm going to invite Nala Abdu to begin with her presentation, and welcome all again. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Okay, sorry about this. Once again, thank you, Beverly, and all who helped in organizing this session. Let me begin with land acknowledgement. I am speaking right now from the unsurrendered and unceded and stolen lands of the Anishinaabe and the Algonquin nations. This is not a symbolic statement for me. This is coming deep from the heart of a person who knows the meaning of the land for Indigenous people. Let me begin with a short, verse by Mahmoud Darwish when he asks, what is the homeland? And his answer is, it is the longing to die to restore the truth and the land. The homeland is not a land, but the land and the right together. The truth is with you, he says, and the land is with them. What Hamas, a Palestinian resistance movement, did on October 7th was a military resistance act to end Israeli occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid, which has been controlling their lives since 1967. But the start of all of this goes back to about 100 years earlier. In 1917, Britain, who knew it would colonize Palestine, remember, after the Second World War, the Europeans literally divided the so-called Middle East. I don't like to mention this word because it's an imperialist coinage. It's an American coinage. But Britain knew it would colonize Palestine. It signed the Balfour Declaration announcing its commitment to building a Jewish state in Palestine. In other words, listen to this, a colonial power occupying one people's land decides to gift it to a foreign group, the Zionist movement. That's the beginning of it. The British trained and equipped Zionist gangs to do the job. The job was to exterminate the Palestinian people and implant the Zionist state. Around 75 to 80% of the Palestinians were forced to leave their homes and lands under the bombs and gunfire. Palestinians who remained in Palestine in 1948, like myself, and became citizens were placed under Israeli military rule until 1966 and kept under Israeli apartheid rule until today. Since 1948, Israel has destroyed more than 550 villages, replacing them with Jewish settlements built on the rubble. In 1967, Israel waged a war against the remaining of Palestinian land, further expansion of the settler colonial state. the West Bank under Jordan, against Gaza Strip under Egypt, and expanded its territories into the Syrian Golan Heights. Immediately after, Israel annexed Jerusalem and the Golan Heights and kept the West Bank and Gaza territories under its brutal military rule. For the past 17 years, Israel has placed the Gaza Strip under sea, land, and air siege. And now it intensified further its blockade by cutting off electricity, water, food, medical aid, and fuel. Remember, there are hospitals there. More devastating has been Israel's killing machine of innocent civilians in Gaza. Israel has been using the policy of carpet bombing, scorched earth bombing, and a war of extermination of the Palestinians. It bombed homes on children's bodies, women and men, and killed over 5,500 people, including more than 2,000 children. Over 15,000 civilians were injured, with over 5,000 civilians still missing under the rubble. Israel is bombing streets. It bombed 18 out of the 22 bakeries in Gaza. Its immoral bombing destroyed mosques and churches, including the Baptist Church, which contained a hospital. This church was used as a shelter for civilians fleeing Israeli genocide in northern Gaza, killing over 500 innocent civilians. Similarly, Israel bombed the Greek Orthodox St. Porphyrius Church, the fourth oldest church in the world, killing hundreds of people, again taking refuge there. These churches, similarly like the UNRWA centers, UNRWA is United Nations Refugee and Works Agency, and schools used as refuge for Palestinian fleeing Israeli bombardment, were also bombed, and still until today. Why? One answer could be that Israel is simply powerful and it can. But this is not the answer. Since its inception, Israel's main aim has been to establish a purely Jewish state in Palestine. And the only way to do this is through genocide and exterminating the Palestinians. And this is what it is doing now. Remember, the Gaza Strip is a small area of 40 by 12 kilometers only and has a population of 2.2 million people, making it the most populated area on earth. 8 Israeli wars and brutality in Gaza have been conducted since its colonial occupation, devastating its economy and social and cultural life. The Nakba genocide of 1948 is being repeated here again. Genocide, extermination, and elimination of the indigenous Palestinians is a process that has been going on since the emergence of the Zionist movement, not just the state or the Zionist state. Imperialism can only succeed through the use of force, violence, and more violence. We all remember the imperialist devastation of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, among others. We should not be surprised about the US and Western pouring of military, political, and other support this heinous attack has generated. The US and its imperialist camp are rushing to aid their strategic arm in Western Asia and not the Middle East, again, as the latter is an imperialist invention. The West is protecting its imperialist police pole in the region. Biden declared earlier that if there were no Israel, we would have created Israel to keep our interests in this region. The British and Zionist colonial forces in Palestine created Israel, and the US took over after World War II. The US gave Israel a blank check to continue its atrocities with gifts of billions of dollars and substantial military aid, making Israel a nuclear power with the most potent military power in the region. All this is for Israel to stay on top of all the neighboring Arab countries and the Palestinian question and keep the imperialist interest in the region alive. US imperialism, like many European countries, uses lies, fabrications, and invented news to destroy Iraq, killing an estimated 2 million people there, only to find out later that Iraq does not possess WMD. Today, the same powers are heavily involved in lying and fabrication to cover up Israel's immoral, heinous atrocities. Imperialism, the further expansion of racial capitalism, has always been racist and orientalist. And this is what we see in media today. Against their demonization, calling them terrorists, human animals, as the Israeli defense minister says, Palestinians have been and continue to resist the Zionist settler colonial project. The settlers in Israel, and actually completing my talk soon, the settlers in Israel, especially those living on recently stolen Palestinian land in the West Bank, have been well armed by the state and supported by the army. They have been involved in oppressing, humiliating, and even killing Palestinians in the occupied territories. Some of their actions include burning Palestinian cars, burning farmers' fields, destroying homes, and killing civilians. They show total contempt for all Palestinians, Muslims and Christians alike. That they desecrated Al-Aqsa Mosque and kept attacking Muslim prayers, especially the women who stayed in the mosque to guard it from the settlers. They spit on the church, in the Church of Nativity, and on Christian prayers going in or getting out of the churches. Israeli settlers spit on priests, ministers, and nuns in Bethlehem, especially during Christian festivities. What do Palestinians need? We just need your support and solidarity. Send as many letters as you can to the prime minister, to the media, to your friends and family. Educate them about Palestine. Let them know that Palestinians are not terrorists, that Palestine does not exist, as the whole Western world has been saying, that Palestine is there and Palestinians have been resisting for almost 100 years and will continue to resist until their freedom as human beings, as people who is living on their own land. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nala. Next, we have Courtney Sky.
There you go. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Beverly. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So, my name's Courtney Sky. I'm Mohawk Turtle Clan, and I just wanted to share some of my family, some of the women that come before me, honor them and show them as I present. I carry them with me wherever I go, and I'm thankful for everyone that's gathered here. Thankful for the people that have gathered and are from my own homelands, and I'm here to talk to you about our work that's happening in my territory. But first, I wanted to share with you a statement that our organization has put together from 6 Nations to Palestine with love. So we at Protect the Track join our siblings from across Turtle Island, answering the call for Indigenous organizations to unequivocally voice our support for the Palestinian people. We stand beside our Palestinian kin in their struggles to find peace in their homelands, just as they have stood beside us in our struggles here. We stand beside all those who, like us, have endured oppression, displacement, erasure, and violence. We denounce Zionism, which is a settler colonial project for perpetuating violence, which is taking Palestinian and Israeli lives with impunity. We also call attention to all those who have made it clear that they will uphold violent white supremacy around the world while hypocritically making land acknowledgements and hollow gestures at reconciliation here. We challenge the false narratives that settlers hold exclusive right of possession of Indigenous lands and waters. Eurocentric history and white supremacy are myths that uphold the racist, sexist, and ableist beliefs which saturate all parts of Western society, media, and culture. As we at Protect the Tract are promoting the land stewardship of the Haudenosaunee people in our homelands, asserting sovereignty, reclaiming and restoring the balance between ourselves and creation, we are working to undo settler colonialism everywhere. It is time to lift the cloud of denial and wipe away the fear that darkens the vision of the future. We all must take up our responsibility to steward shared lands with the joy and prosperity of future generations at the forefront of our minds. It would be unfair to leave these struggles and this burden to our children. The attempts to eradicate us have failed, as will the attempts to eradicate Palestinians. Settler colonialism will never end if we do not challenge and resist it. The only acceptable outcome is peace amongst all people. So we call on for the end to the siege in Gaza, allowing necessary humanitarian aid into Gaza, immediate restoration of electricity, fuel, and other essential services, immediate ceasefire and de-escalation, to restore the freedom of movement for Palestinians, to end the occupation, and call on all our siblings, Native organizations, and governments to issue solidarity statements with Palestinians and Gaza. So for anyone who has not been aware of the Haudenosaunee people or us as, where we are between the area of the Three Lakes. This is a nice little map that we have of all of the contemporary Haudenosaunee reserves, territory spaces, reclaimed areas, and where my community fits in. So on the left side of the screen, there is a small tract of land, the Haldeman Tract in Oswego or Haudenosaunee Federal Territory, and those are where my people call home. Following the Sullivan Campaign of 1779, Haudenosaunee people were forcibly removed from the Finger Lakes region by an act of genocide ordered by George Washington, meant to eradicate Haudenosaunee people from the Finger Lakes region. Over the course of a year, 5,000 troops led by Sullivan marched across over 40 Haudenosaunee communities, burning our food stores, driving us from the land, displacing us, and we were forced to go to Fort Niagara as internally displaced refugees to essentially escape this attempted genocide that the US committed against our people. They were unsuccessful. Haudenosaunee people were able to travel to these northern parts of our territory, our hunting territory, and through there, the promise of the Haldeman Proclamation was made to preserve 6 miles on either side of the Grand River for the use and enjoyment of the Haudenosaunee people forever, so that we could find peace for the land that we had lost through this act of genocide, for allying with the British Crown in the American Revolution. You can see from the outline of the Haldeman Tract that that commitment has not been kept, and we have been forcibly removed from even that smaller portion of territory into what is now the Six Nations or the Grand River Reserve. And so within the kind of L shape of the tract, the smaller purple portion represents about 5% of that original territory of the Haldeman Tract, and that is where we currently live, limited in our ability to expand and exist as free people. Haudenosaunee people have long experienced state violence from the, it's been ongoing, even as we are free on our lands. You may recall Douglas Creek Estates or Gunestado, which happened in 2006. I mean, earlier there was Oka, there was all these contemporary Indigenous settler wars that have happened for us, where road blockades have been erected. The province has spent tens of $millions in policing. There's been many calls to action and many works of solidarity that have happened around the denial of the rights of Haudenosaunee people that have happened at Grand River. We've experienced court injunctions as well, so a permanent injunction barring us from traveling on our homelands, as well as threats of multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Currently, the spokesperson of 1492 Lambeck Lane, Skylar Williams, is named on a civil lawsuit for $20 million related to the land defense of 1492 Lambeck Lane. And so this is kind of what our relationship has come to. We have had our lands dispossessed from us. We've had our ability to expand our own community limited. We have about 27,000 band members in our community, and we have no space for them. We only have about 14,000 that actually live in our community. And this picture is really difficult for me personally. This is outside of the Aberfoyle Springs in Pushlinch, Ontario. This is an underground aquifer that feeds pristine water and is essentially the lifeblood of the upper portions of the Haldeman Tract. And, you know, through these different struggles that I've shown you through, you know, Oka or 2006, like these were times when I was a young person. I was 18 years old in 2006. I was going to high school when that land defense action happened in our community. And when 1492 Lambeck Lane came around, our elders, our uncles, our aunties that led that action said that they are, you know, that they almost felt grief because they took that stand because they thought that they were doing something that meant that their children would never have to fight that battle. And instead, 15 years later at 1492 Lambeck Lane, they saw the younger generations have to stand on front lines and face police violence. And this picture here at Aberfoyle Springs, you know, this action to defend the land, I see a young woman, Serena Mendez-Zabel, who is a young person from my community who I mentor, and she's here too, facing that same police violence. And we've done these actions as our leadership to try and push for peaceful resolutions. But at the same time, you know, like my ancestors before me, I see the next generation having to face this same police violence. So we know that this is systemic. We know that this violence is ingrained within provincial law. I show this because, you know, I showed that picture of our territory earlier, the area between the three lakes. This map here shows the provincial plan around planning. So in the named municipalities here, these are all within Haudenosaunee territory. And these are all of the municipalities where Ontario has changed laws around planning and the Places to Grow Act as places to grow, to see the further expansion of development happening without consent of the Haudenosaunee people. And so all of this development is entirely within our territory, entirely within the Haldeman Tract. But this map also overlays lands that are protected from the green belt. So the darkest gray areas are the green belt. And, you know, we at Protect the Tract have overlaid the tract on this map to show just where this land theft is happening for us specifically. But I think it also does a great job of illustrating just how the process of colonialism has happened, especially in Southern Ontario, where we see the map, the boundaries of municipalities fall along the territories. So certainly at one time, there was an intent by Ontario to respect these boundaries of the Haldeman Tract. There was a design within the fabric of the province to create these boundaries, to create these lines where we would have our territory for us to steward ourselves. But as the colonial project continued, there was even more encroachment onto those lands, where eventually even those boundaries fell to the need for development to occur within Indigenous territories. So we see a lot of the systemic issues that happen that create and manufacture the environment where this battle where this conflict is created. You know, this is a very simplified version of the Canadian Constitution, but I use it for illustrative purposes. So Canada's Constitution divides the province and the federal government for two separate legislative entities. The province is legislates municipalities. The federal government oversees Indian Act and the land reserved for Indians as described by the Act. And within that systemic framework, there's all these legislative gaps and voids where the municipalities don't necessarily interact well with local federal institutions. The Indian Act doesn't create a relationship with the municipalities, but the municipalities are the ones who are doing licensing. And then you have third parties who then control that land, who are developing it, who essentially, settler people are then used as a tool to displace Indigenous peoples and Indigenous interests. And none of these things uphold the rights for Indigenous people that are entrenched in Canada's Constitution. There's a lot of intersecting ways where barriers are created that stop Indigenous people and even settler people from really interacting and creating conversations or collaborations in a systemic way that is meaningful. So we see that as being a key area to target to create change. We also work outside of that Canadian constitutional framework around international human rights mechanisms as well. So looking for creative and meaningful solutions outside of Canada's legislative framework to create change. We also have developed or acknowledge there's many ways that we can create change and that there's many opportunities that people can pursue with that. Legislative processes, people can build their own political processes that kind of exist outside of legislative frameworks. People might, as we're talking about earlier, those calls to put pressure on government, whether it's in letter writing campaigns or writing to ministers, those kinds of things. And then there's also radical tactics outside of that include many diverse strategies. And at Protect the Tract, we don't deny or refuse any of these tactics, especially as Indigenous people that have experienced so much intergenerational violence and oppression, that we don't dictate to other people how they are responding to the experiences of colonial violence that they have experienced in their life. And while there are other Haudenosaunee people that might take different tactics than I might to create change, I still respect that they are doing the best they can within their own lived experience and choices that they've made. So, this, for example, might be Indigenous people that are signing to pipeline deals or doing economic development in a way that I might not necessarily disagree with. I understand that they are not working to eradicate our people. I have compassion and try to build understanding where there's an opportunity where I think we share an interest and a recognition in the future joy of our people, and we can create dialogue and space and understanding to then talk about how we're going to engage in different things, but and have a meaningful dialogue amongst our own people to undo that division that's been imposed on us by a settler colonial government. So this is where the moratorium comes in. The moratorium is Haudenosaunee law. It's been passed by our hereditary government structure on April 20th, 2021. These are some of our hereditary chiefs here, denoted with their deer antlers on the top of their headdresses or their gastoas. And from there, we created Protect the Tract. The moratorium is a catalyst for change. Protect the Tract is the effort to mobilize that, to undo all of the displaced knowledge and relationships. We are developing the capacity of our own community to engage civilly, especially within our own inherent government structure, our own Indigenous government structure. We want to explicitly and deliberately create spaces for political conversations, because we know it's through political mobilization that we can create a catalyst for social change in our community. So all the spaces that we create, we are trying to have that background of saying we're doing this with a specifically, explicitly political purpose. We are not just simply doing cultural tasks outside of that political reality, which is often how the federal government makes funding for projects available for communities. You can do drumming, you can do culture, but heaven forbid you do anything that challenges the settler state while you're doing that meeting or other task. So we exist outside of that framework and are entirely grassroots run to be able to facilitate those meaningful conversations for our people, especially as the people who have been oppressed for so long. We often find our community members have just existed in survival mode for so long that they don't often have the luxury to engage in kind of these more historical or philosophical conversations. We've almost lost the ability to dream of our future when you're so worried about survival in the present. And so we work really hard to create spaces of safety for our community members to then think about these things and think that, yes, they actually really are passionate about our traditional way of doing things. They are hungry for our traditional knowledge. They want to exercise these land stewardship abilities. So again, we uphold our traditional laws. We embed our Indigenous laws within our work. We're responsible to climate change. And we also have a vision of our future where all of our people are connected to our lands, confident in their identity, and confident in how they're going to engage politically. We're intrinsically connected to the water and the land, that restoring this relationship we know is fundamental to having healing for ourselves in our lands and healing ourselves from the violence and dispossession that we have endured. And then this is just for the policy wonks and the social, the organizational people that might be listening. But we do also really love data and information. So we do measure ourselves and our impact along 3 spheres so that we are having people that feel they're enhanced their connection to the land, that they're feeling through their work that they're confident, they're gaining confidence in their identity, and that they feel like they're able to navigate these political processes. So we do measure ourselves against that metric year to year as we are doing all this work. So I just wanted to share some more of our beautiful pictures of our homelands, our work. What does this mean? You know, this is 1492 Landback Lane. Just some of the peaceful ways that we've been able to overcome that violence, that we work with allies, we work with people along our community, and we do these things to try to explicitly build relationships in our community and create safety for our people. And with that comes these sometimes difficult spaces. You know, we've had MMIW gatherings, we've centered families and people who have experienced violence. And in doing the work that we're doing, it just naturally occurred where queer and 2S LGBTQ kin are fundamentally a part of every decision that we make. And in these spaces of where we find ourselves defending our land, we find these moments of beauty and reconnection that are just kind of profound and amazing for us to have. We've also done things like deer hide tanning, because we know that we rely on the deer, but we've lost a community practice of regularly tanning the hides. So how do we tan the hides? How do we then use all the portions of the deer? And then from that relationship, how do we understand the deer? How do they travel through our territories? How do they use the land? What kind of environment do they need? How do we protect the environment so that not just us as traditional people are thriving along the Haldeman Tract, but that deer, the plants that they need to survive, and all the knowledge that we need to have to be able to maintain this intimate relationship that we have with them as we continue to live in the Haldeman Tract. So where do scholars fit into all of this? We have a Haudenosaunee Scholars Network that we maintain. So we've called for all Haudenosaunee scholars across all the different universities and colleges where they exist to join this network. We have periodical meetings and event sessions and side tables at conferences where we gather Haudenosaunee academic knowledge keepers to connect with the work that we're having. But I also wanted to shout out some of the specific universities and people within those institutions that have done amazing work around supporting Protect the Tract. So Rick Montour, who's a Haudenosaunee scholar from McMaster University, is a champion of our work. He lends his own academic research and knowledge to our organization for free. He's present in every meeting. He responds to all of our emails. He lends his knowledge freely and openly, and also his influence within his own institution to create space for us to occupy and share our knowledge. He's been a champion of us planning a art gallery exhibit to talk about the Haldeman Tract that will be hosted by the university. And Allison Ion is a settler ally who also works at the university, who takes on a huge administrative burden and who has offered her skills on grant writing and administration to ease that burden on us and our organization to help us be able to do the projects and work that we do. The same goes for Talina Atfield at the University of Waterloo. So Talina is a Haudenosaunee scholar as well, and she lends all of her work with community in mind in supporting the work of Protect the Tract through participating as well through her own learning journey, and again, leveraging every opportunity within the organization to be present in community to then share all of the resources and the skills that they've gained in navigating systemic institutions to be able to benefit our community. And Logan McDonald, of course, as a Indigenous person, but who is not Indigenous to our territory, has worked to amplify us tremendously. Protect the Tract, as you've seen, I'm an artist in residence at the Longhouse Labs, which is Logan McDonald's project. And he works to ensure that even though he's Indigenous to Turtle Island, that as a visitor in our territory, he's constantly creating space for Haudenosaunee people and systemically thinking of how are we supported and how are we taken care of here in the territory. And then, of course, at University of Toronto, Dr. Susan Hill is a tremendous source of information. She's dedicated her academic career into undoing settler colonialism works. She's literally written the book on the Haldeman Tract and lends her own knowledge to us in an anti-role that transcends any of the prescripted boundaries that are placed on us as the Indigenous people within colonial institutions. She's always there for us and always supportive. And we wouldn't have been able to do any of this work here without these people and these academics who work beyond the norms of universities to be able to exist in community in an ethical way. So just leaving on different things for anyone in different own communities. This is something I try to impose on or talk to everyone about when we talk about our own solutions. No one can impose solutions on your community, just like no one can impose solutions on Haudenosaunee people in our territories. For any Indigenous people or who is looking for inspiration or a sign for today, here's your sign. No one can impose solutions on you or your people or your communities. You have a right to self-determination that includes the ability to change your mind and to make mistakes. When people who are so often denied their rights don't see them reflected or honored in any way, and we have to assert our rights ourselves, that's the foundation of these messages. And you have a right to have an input on decision making, and you don't have to have all of the answers to be able to be part of decision making. So often when policy conversations are happening, it's put back onto the community to find all the solutions, to know how to house themselves, to know how to feed themselves, to know how to amend their disabilities. And that's just not true. You have a right to be heard and be a part of those decision-making, period. You don't have to have solutions. You can be part of making solutions, develop them, and creating them. And that's it. Y'all for having me. There's different ways to get a hold of me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Courtney. We'll move to AJ now. AJ?
Hi. I want to begin by acknowledging the territory that I am speaking from, the traditional, ancestral, unceded, and occupied territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. And I also want to thank the Scholars Strike and all the organizers for having me speak, and as well the folks who came before me who shared really important and moving words, in particular about settler colonialism. My heart has been heavy for a long time, and today is really breaking for people in Palestine. One can be unequivocally against collective punishment, against forced displacement and genocide, and not be in favor of attacking civilians. And there is just a complete loss of nuance and critical thinking, especially in universities, which I find very sad and unfortunately not surprising. I'm also proud to be disabled, and that can fully coexist with the call to end disablement, to stop war and poverty, which we're seeing unfold on a massive scale right now. I'm going to just start out with a story. The summer before last, I was in the backseat of a car on a mountain, and we turned a corner, and a single-seat plane was suddenly coming at us, trying to land on our very narrow highway. Our driver was able to swerve sort of around / under the wing of the plane, and then around the semi-truck that was coming into our lane to try and get around the plane that it was behind. And this moment really captures how I feel a lot of the time these days. Paradoxically, time feels as if it's moving so unbelievably quickly and as if it's fully standing still. I have no control over what's coming at me, and stuff is happening that seems impossible, like it only happens on TV. It's dangerous, lives are at stake, and it feels like there's nothing that we can do. But it's the next moments that matter. It's how we respond, how we care for each other, how we care for the community around us, and how we keep each other safe and that we do have control over. And I'm telling you this story because unlike in present day, this story, everything turns out fine, because I have a profound sense of overwhelm, which I think is the case for a lot of people. And it's in these moments that overwhelm can consume us and be completely immobilizing. And I think it's helpful to break things down, and incredibly important that we not be immobilized by these feelings of overwhelm and powerlessness. So today I'm going to just break things down as learn, listen, do. So learn, we must reflect on what we've done and do it better. There was a major failing amongst many of us who were working in the name of social justice from 2020 on, who did step 3, do, but didn't do step 2, listen. And this is often articulated as taking leadership from people who are most affected. What many disabled people were saying at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic is that we were being socially abandoned. Disabled people were warning of a eugenic attack on our communities by anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, and COVID denialists. And folks know this discourse: only weak people die from COVID, survival of the fittest, etc. Much of the left failed to combat this rising eugenicism, even when many were actively working against its corollaries: rising right-wing populism, anti-authoritarianism, and fascism. And this is even the case, even though we know that fascists have embraced eugenics historically incredibly enthusiastically. And eugenic discourses and disableist discourses were used to funnel people into authoritarian movements. I don't think it's useful for us to blame ourselves for the rise of fascism, although many think pieces have. Fascism is the plane, but it's important to be critical of our failures of social abandonment as we work to combat it. How did this happen? Systemic disableism. Disabled people were already socially isolated and marginalized in our communities and in social justice movements. And disabled people, we've been saying this for a long time. So disabled folks were viewed as sacrificable in order for other people to go back to living quote unquote normal lives. And many of these folks remain excluded from university spaces and from public spaces. And there's now a resurgence of hate against 2S LGBTQ people. For the last couple of months, I've been mapping the connections between and the networks between these organizations. I have an article in Sask Dispatch that came out yesterday about it. The nexus of organizing around parents' rights and anti-SOGI organizing is in COVID denialism. So much of the center of where that comes from is from these same groups. And it's completely unsurprising that the group of people who deemed disabled people disposable are now attacking 2S LGBTQ communities. And had we more effectively intervened on the eugenic logics, had more 2S LGBTQ people recognized that they are us, that disabled people are integral to our communities, queer and trans, especially trans communities, might not be under attack, at least not in the same way that they are today at the same scale. So it's important also to understand that academics, scholars are playing a crucial role in these attacks. Scholars are legitimizing the oppression of trans kids in particular right now. Scholars have, one scholar in particular, Jamie Fusner, designed a UCLA study described as torture for trans people. And this study was suspended after community outrage. And then Fusner went on to be hired by U of T. Research is used to delay action on housing and poverty. It's used to pathologize disabled people, and scholars claim expertise over our lives. We become subjects or participants, and they're the experts. And I recognize I'm both of those things. And so it's really important that people that are a part of these communities recognize this and fight back against this discourse. So we listen to the communities that are impacted. We hear how they're experiencing oppression on the ground, and we work to combat it where it is. And one of the most important sites of learning for me and many of us has been also that we listen to the people that are being swayed by these hateful messages. We learn, we listen, we do. One of the things that we do is that those of us who can, we talk to the people that are being swayed by populist arguments undergirded by hate, and we do the gentle and engagement of deprogramming. This is patient, hard work. It's unglamorous, and it's the work that people that want to be called allies need to be doing on a regular, even daily basis. We do by avoiding immobilization from overwhelm, by taking small pieces and working on them and linking our struggles together, building community and building cultures of care. There's been a strong shift towards prefigurative activism in the past decade, and prefigurative activism means prefiguring the world that we want to live in the present. This is exciting to me because it builds an abolitionist praxis into our daily work. It means, as Chris Dixon says, that we mentalize people. We can't treat people as means, but only as ends. So this means that no one can be sacrificable so that other people can have a semblance of normalcy. It means that we can build caring communities that we want to live in. There are lots of possibilities within the university for what that means, including building accessible spaces, bringing abolitionist praxis into our pedagogy, and just changing how we interact with one another, challenging hierarchies. But the university is fundamentally a hierarchical neoliberal institution that's designed to keep us from prefiguring the world that we want to live in, and we cannot lose track of that. The shift to prefigurative organizing, however, is a concerning one because it can just as easily signal social abandonment. There are also activists who proclaim that it's illegitimate to make demands on the state, that we should be building all of our care and social infrastructure within our communities. Insight asks us to imagine that there's no outside of our community, and I think that that's essential for us to keep in mind. But when groups are establishing networks of care, there are many people that are outside of these networks, and some of those people have life and death care needs. This, of course, isn't to say that the state is adequately meeting people's needs, simply that the state meets some of the needs of those people who are isolated. We currently have a housing crisis and a profound need for massive amounts of housing. Our communities are nowhere near the capacity of building the literally hundreds of thousands of units that are needed. Should we work and try and build that capacity? Absolutely. Should we not demand public housing as we do it because we don't want to make demands on the states? Political puritanism is really easy if you're housed. Taking the position means that you're not listening. Unhoused people aren't waiting for a total transformation of society, they're waiting for housing. So prefigurative politics in this instance is a form of social abandonment. We need to do in a way that reflects our learning and our listening. So again, we learn, and that also involves listening to critique, especially from directly impacted people. We listen and we do in tangible, material, and meaningful ways. How do we combat social abandonment? We build cultures of care. We help meet collective needs. We support people, especially when they're marginalized people. We don't blame them, like the NDP just did with Black disabled MPP Sarah Jama for contributing to unsafe work environments because she received threats, because she was the victim. We fight back. Winning things, no matter how small, helps build movements. We help build hope. And ultimately, we become the plane. We become the unstoppable force, and we lay a runway so that people can respond from places of care and social justice and create the fundamental social transformations that we need. Thanks.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you very much. We'll move to Ronaldo Walcott now, please. Thank you.
Hello, it's great to be here. I'm coming to you from the Six Nations Confederacy territories that some people know as Buffalo. The 60s just refuses to become the past. I'm pleased that Scholar Strike's first and foremost understanding is that what we do in the university is labor. Often when people, especially colleagues in the academy, hear us say, it is a job, just a job, they get the wrong impression of what is meant by that. As job, as labor, work in the academy needs not totally consume you, nor become your primary identity. I make no value judgment if that is the case for you. However, it's important to note the different relations one might have to the job and what those relations tell us about a larger politics of life and living. I often say that the job is just that, a job. But my understanding of work or labor of any job is that it is always suffused with struggle, antagonism, and a desire to change the world. So the university is both work for me and a site of political and ethical struggle. And furthermore, my work in university is to undo the violent and brutal work that the post-Columbus modern university has done and continues to do. With such a perspective, my understanding of when to put the job in its place is part of a struggle to survive so that I can keep on struggling. The 60s remain a significant and foundational problem for the late modern university. In particular, the almost global overthrow of white supremacist capitalism and its enablers in the 60s, and the role that the peripheries of the university played cannot be emphasized enough. It was students and workers in the streets, each demanding a better world, an end of colonization, end of war, and women, Black and other ethnic minorities and students arguing for rights, the anti-nuclear movement, and so on, that brought the global white capitalist supremacy almost to its knees. Since that historic and still unfolding moment, the forces arrayed against such potential and possible change have worked consistently across a wide range of areas to make sure global revolution remains an impossibility. One must say that in the last years, they appear to be significantly widening the gap towards achieving their goals. What I therefore want to concentrate on in my brief time here is what is the nature of the work, the labor that we might do in the university, given the historical context that we are living in. I think two things are clearly at stake. One, the significant struggle over meaning that we find ourselves in. And two, what kinds of risks might we have to take to make more livable possibilities arise and arrive? First, let me say very clearly that the university is a pillar of white global capitalist supremacy. And while the university is skilled enough to expand to include views that might undermine it, it is also brutal enough to contract and expunge and purge those same views simultaneously, as we are experiencing and witnessing at this moment in time. The work that has to be done is the work of making meaning, not making truth, but making meaning. What we have seen since the 1960s and on is that the forces arrayed against us are not interested in the truth of our lives. They are concerned to produce meanings that make those truths seem otherwise. Indeed, meaning making is so very acute that we have seen how Christopher Rufo launched a moral panic against critical race theory, and he was able to transform the meaning of critical race theory into a boogeyman with dire consequences. These consequences have rippled all the way into universities and colleges, the most notorious example being New College of Florida. But as we know from the 60s, the university is an important site of struggle because it's one of the many important places that produce meanings that are a buttress against the very lies it was invented to help perpetuate. We struggle against the university, but importantly, we also launch struggles from within the university too. We are seeing the kind of practice that emerges from these political actions cascading in different ways across geographies. Take, for example, the claims being made in the last weeks that decolonization is terrorism, leading to attacks on scholars and students. Today, right now, such claims are not about the truths of decolonization. It's about giving decolonization a meaning that keeps intact the violence of Euro-American humanism and all that flows from it, as if it is neutral and sensible. I could give other examples like trans lives turned into quote unquote gender ideology, or distorting claims about freedom of speech and academic freedom. What we are witnessing is that the empirical realities of our lives and living do not add up to the truths of our lives. Instead, we find ourselves in a struggle where the evidence of our lives is offered up as meaning, meaning to others than they meaning something different to others than they mean to ourselves or than as we experience them. It is always worth reminding that Jordan Peterson, the doyen of white global supremacy, launched his program of misinformation from inside the university, first attacking trans people and making erroneous claims about freedom of speech that gave a meaning to a policy that did not exist in Bill C-16 when he claimed it compelled specific kinds of speech. In the university, our work, our job must now take a different tack, which is to say that we must find ways to evoke and produce meaning that reaches beyond the desire for people to know our truths. Knowing our truths has been seductive for inclusion, but that inclusion has so dramatically failed us. Instead, we will need to take some different and new risks. One of the things that we must make new meaning around is what constitutes the left and left politics. For the last 30 years or so, we have been compromised by supporting ever-increasing centrist political parties as if they are the left. We have been willing to live with a political mirage that has aided in the ongoing contraction of life for most of us, often making the claim that once elected, we can push them further. In almost every instance, that the push them further has not occurred. It has been a fantasy that needs to end. We must now refuse such fantasies and practices and instead engage in mass community educative projects that reanimate what the left actually might mean. As we have seen just yesterday with the Ontario NDP, They clearly do not and cannot at this time represent the meaning of the left necessary for participating in bringing in a new global order of and for life. The peripheries that we occupy the university has something important to contribute to such a change. Scholar Strike is founded on and committed to withholding labor. When we withhold labor in the university, we take a risk. Importantly, we send a message about the meaning of that labor too. And this meaning exposes the university's fundamental relationship to white capitalist Euro-American humanist supremacy. Similarly, I believe that mass boycotts of representative democracy in this part of the world to illegitimize this system of governance are necessary. The difference between the governing and ruling parties and those in opposition have been minimal for so long as to only make a difference in terms of the speed of collective people power dispossession they practice. We can hurry on the downfall of this system by refusing to play in it. The university is one place we can begin to do such work, given that the university is one of the most important pillars in producing the conditions of social abandonment that we must contend with in the first instance. As I never tire of pointing out, our own more radical dreams for the academy itself got stolen, repurposed as EDI and DEI, and installed with representative identity figures, all of whom have obviously gone missing in this moment of Palestinian genocide and accompanying universities' repression. But we are expected to cheer every time one of these identity figures occupy a seat at the white supremacist high table, not fully recognizing that they are being more firmly pulled into the infrastructure of the white supremacist global order, of which the university is a significant pillar. We say nah. There are real risks to speaking and thinking, and therefore working in ways that are against the late modern university while still being inside it. Every day since October 7th, we have been bearing witness to those risks for many individuals. Each of us must decide the risk that we can bear. But we should also know that the institutions depend on us turning up to work, to do the job, to labor. So what is at stake then? Most of the globe is at war with Euro-American humanism and its violent, coercive imposition. Euro-American humanism and the extension of its logics of rights to the rest of us, usually in the aftermath of brutal violence and resistance to that violence in the first instance, is always contingent on joining the world as they have made it. Euro-American humanism is an eliminationist project. It absorbs its subordinates as a second tier, or it exterminates them. The right to rights is never conceived as remaking or reinventing the world that we presently have into the one that we desperately need. Instead, we are asked to be inducted into the world as the only condition of what instead we are asked to be inducted into their world as the only condition of what a life might be. The hypocrisy of Euro-American humanism is that it can bomb you and offer you humanitarian aid at the same time, as if it is saving the life it is actually taking. It can collectively punish you and call it rooting out enemy combatants. This is not just gaslighting or doublespeak. It is that the white supremacist logics that underwrite Euro-American humanism is only invested in its continuance and its perpetuation, and it will adapt, articulate, adjust, and incorporate any position that allows it to continue to be the ruling script of global life. But indeed, the struggle to end colonization everywhere is the foundation of neoliberal social abandonment, which is the foundation of neoliberal social abandonment, is not to end the world made from colonization. It is one to end the legacy of colonization so that something new might emerge. The roots of colonization has been to expand itself when necessary to include, but only on its own terms, and to contract its borders when more serious demands are made at stake for a remaking of the world. In this most recent outbreak of war on Palestinians, We are witnessing Euro-American humanism in action as an insistence that there are only two options for the oppressed. Join in on your knees or die. We, the colonized, refuse both. In short, Euro-American humanism can't free us because it was intended to do otherwise, regardless of its late modern adaptations. We in the university can work to give a different account of what life and living might be, an account and therefore a new meaning that saves our collective lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gary Kinsman?
Hi. I'm speaking to you today from Mi'kmaq territory on the East Coast. I just wanted to make that clear at the beginning. I wanted to thank Beverly. I wanted to thank Nala. I wanted to thank Courtney, AJ, and Ronaldo for their words of brilliance, inspiration, and resistance. I'm dedicating this brief talk to Amy Gottlieb, who was a very good friend of mine who died in July and had a wonderful, incredible, almost utopian memorial gathering of life that I was able to attend in Toronto last week. So what is central to social abandonment right now is genocidal practices against Indigenous people. That takes place in many, many different forms, in many, many different contexts. Right now, it is crucially an attack on Palestinians and is leading to genocidal practices and the murder of thousands and thousands of people. But I think we also need to recognize that another side of that social abandonment is the vicious attacks and restrictions that are imposed on people who are opposed to this form of social abandonment, who are standing up for Palestinian people and are saying Palestinian lives matter. So that what we have to see is that these numerous attempts by university administrations to defund and to stifle student organizations that have actually issued pro-Palestinian statements need to be opposed as their central vehicles for facilitating social abandonment. That we need to oppose the Ontario NDP and its expulsion, basically, of Sarah Jama from its caucus as being, it is now clearly on the other side of the struggle, and it is not something that we can ever expect to support us. So Sarah Jama has been basically attacked because she supports Palestine solidarity, she's Black, and she's disabled. I mean, we need to be really clear on that the NDP is operating here centrally as a vehicle for social abandonment. So what is social abandonment? It's been talked about in numerous contexts in terms of what people have said so far. It is basically how groups of people in the context of the racist, racial capitalist, patriarchal, heterosexist, transphobic, and ableist society, and we could go on describing forms of exploitation and oppression, how basically people are expelled from normality, are expelled from life in some ways, become so-called disposable people, and also how people's rights, wages, and access to social services get systematically ripped apart as they are declared to be socially abandoned. They are the people that are made surplus, are made disposable, and have their rights and living conditions abandoned by established social institutions. They're also, these practices of social abandonment are also fundamental means through which the gains that we have won in the past in varying ways, and oftentimes they're incredibly limited, are systematically demolished and ripped apart in the types of social worlds that we live in right now. Obviously, the development and generation of precarious labor is one crucial feature of that, and that will be talked about in the next session. So there's a couple of different areas that I want to cover. I was really glad that AJ talked about the pandemic, because I think we need to be absolutely clear that this pandemic is not over, that we actually live in a new form of disaster racial capitalism in which numerous groups of people are actually being sentenced to either death under the pandemic, or through the creation of more relations of disability and health-related problems to lifelong situations that will be quite devastating in their lives. We should remember that for the people in the global south, vaccine apartheid, treatment apartheid still continues, and that we need to reject all of the claims that we are somehow moving back to normality. We need to reject our normality and build something entirely different that is actually based on maintaining and defending everyone's lives and caring for everyone's lives. So other groups of people that face horrors all the time are unhoused people in terms of social abandonment, that we actually have to recognize that the attacks by the police on encampments are actually another vehicle of social abandonment, but they're also a vehicle through which those people who would wish to support people who are unhoused get systematically repressed and undermined by the police because they do not want us to be able to resist their forces of social abandonment in any way, shape, or form. There's, of course, also the incredible attacks on migrant people, people without status in the Canadian state, including the attacks from the border police. So all of these are instances of social abandonment that we need to take very seriously. And as people have already talked about, most people on the so-called left do not take these seriously at all. So how do universities fit into this situation? Here I'm resonating a little bit with what Ronaldo said. Universities and post-secondary institutions more generally are central sites of the social organization of social abandonment. And this takes place in many different ways. We can actually look at what's going on with international students and housing concerns right now. We can look at the attacks on Palestine solidarity that are going on in university situations, but we also need to look at the character of teaching, pedagogy, and research itself. We actually look at where mainstream funding for all of those forms of research go. It's largely to produce knowledge that either facilitates or will not do anything to oppose the forms of social abandonment that we need to be organizing against here. I'll just mention one example of a research project I was involved in at Laurentian University, which was one that did lots of good research around housing problems and homelessness in Northern Ontario. But the central focus of it was actually on developing a better research strategy to count homeless people, to actually count homeless people as objects, as numbers. And supposedly that was going to bring about social transformation. So creating homeless people as objects rather than as active subjects who we learn from and can actually help to empower through the research that we do was one of the fundamental problems I encountered in that particular research project. But these happen over and over again. I'm sure all of you in listening to this could actually detail for us various research projects that actually produce these forms of knowledge that buttress social abandonment and these forms of pedagogy and practice that do nothing to actually liberate people from social abandonment. So I think we also need to talk then about, as Ronaldo was pointing out, how do we transform universities? Because they also are spaces, even though they operate generally in the interests of racial capitalism and all of the other forms of oppression and exploitation we can describe, how do we convert them into much more active centers of resistance to social abandonment, both actively opposing social abandonment within universities and post-secondary contexts, but in the world as a whole, but also in producing knowledge for oppressed people and marginalized people and exploited people, and for the social movements that are trying to organize for social transformation. And that means we have to recognize that in many ways, we are traitors to what the normal university is supposed to be. And we actually need to take some value in that we actually are opposed to the objectivist normalization of universities, that we actually are struggling for something quite different. And I'll just mention a couple of examples here. I guess the main one I'll focus on is the knowledge that gets produced around queer and trans people in university context. I mean, obviously this has been a site for organization of trans and queer organizing. But if we actually look at the type of research that's largely been produced, it's largely been white dominated forms of knowledge that have been produced, excluding Black, Indigenous, and racialized people from the forms of knowledge that get produced in the university context. But also knowledge that doesn't really ask very radical in the sense of getting to the root of the problem forms of research. So it's largely about the denial of rights and the need for inclusion within, or maybe the acceptance of diversity within sort of ruling institutional frameworks. So I'll just give you one example. So there's research on trans people and the prison system that you can look at that's sort of done in an official sort of normal way. And it will pose the question, is the trans person actually getting jailed in the institution that is appropriate to them in terms of their gender? But the actual question that needs to be asked by us is, why are they being arrested at all? Why are they being institutionalized? We need to raise abolitionist questions about, why do prisons exist? Why does carceral injustice exist? And why do trans people actually get implicated in these relationships in particular ways? That's the type of knowledge and the type of organizing we actually need to be involved in. So Scholar Strike wants to be able to expand the possibilities, the capacities within universities and post-secondary institutions as sites of resistance to social abandonment. And this is one of the reasons why we need to raise a whole series of questions about what universities and post-secondary institutions are, and that we can't simply be fighting for rights, the limited rights framework that doesn't actually resolve fundamental problems, because all it does is integrate or include us in systems of exploitation and oppression, but actually begin to develop universities as sites and connections between universities and people organizing within them and outside them, within and beyond them, that can actually begin to develop forms of radical knowledge, but also forms of transformative alternatives right now. I wanted to end off by bringing activism a little bit into our discussions, because I sometimes think that when we're discussing scholars, we forget that many of us are actually quite active activists. I have to say that I was quite pleased to attend the Trans Defender Action in Halifax last Saturday. And I first of all should just mention to you, only one of the anti-trans protesters actually turned up, and we had 300 or 400 people there. But what surprised me was how, when some of us started to raise chants like "Free, Free Palestine," and when Palestinians are under attack, what do we do? Act up, fight back. That hundreds of people joined in those chants with no problems at all. And it really did surprise me, but also I felt really hopeful and pleased about it, that people who actually had come to an action that wasn't specifically around Palestine could actually see and build and make those connections. That's one of the reasons why I think our organizing can actually help lead to a better world, a more livable world. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you all for your amazing, insightful, and very detailed and informative, contributions. And thank you, both Gary and Ronaldo for actually emphasizing what Scholar Strike means and what it was, created for and what it stands for and the work that it does. And I appreciate that very much. I want to actually put out, because we have heard from all of you, right, the profound social abandonment that we are experiencing globally, facilitated by our university institutions, by the state, by nations. We see the way in which the university profoundly supports, the ongoing attacks and I would say, ethnic cleansing by Israel of Palestinian people in the Gaza in this moment that we are witnessing. And wanting and recognize and seeing also the suppression of our voices the suppression of students, the refusal to allow so many of us to speak up against what we are witnessing as clear, genocide. And also what is really critical to note, and I think, Nala made this very clear, that what we are witnessing in Palestine did not start on October 7th, right? This is historical, yet the way in which it is framed is as if this just started when this is a war that Israel has been conducting for decades against Palestinian people. And I think this is important. Now, knowing this, then, can we actually, can the university be transformed, considering its support of colonialism, settler colonialism, capitalism, racism, the ongoing, suppression of us in this time of, of faculty and dissent in this time towards, supporting Palestinian people who are under siege in this moment? Can we justly see any way in which to transform an institution or the institution known as the university in these current times? Or should we be thinking, of a entirely different way of how we learn, how we teach, how we actually organize, how we support each other? And I'll ask Nala to start first. Thanks. Nala, we can't hear you.
I know you can't hear me because I'm muted. Okay, thank you very much again, Beverly, for concluding this session in this beautiful way. My department of sociology at Carleton University put together actually a letter to the Prime Minister asking him to be a human being, literally, and not support, the genocide against the Palestinians. And we were quite, as you know, I did not write it, but whoever wrote it, okay, we're quite so-called objective. Yet, okay, I sent the letter, and our chair received calls by Zionists that the whole, members of the department cannot speak on behalf of the department. As simple as that. Although many members of the department voted yes for this letter. And the letter garnered more than 200 signatures, just the first 2 days of it, 1 day of sending it out. And, it was sent to the Prime Minister, and this is, what he received. So a lot of pressure is on him. Our president sent, a stupid letter, very biased letter around, this whole thing. But that is part of, the whole scenery of our media, of our government, and not only Canada, but, remember, most of this world that we're talking about is either colonial in the past and present, or settler colonial and continues. So we are dealing with literally an imperialist camp that got together to save their own, armed post in that area, because this is what Israel has been serving as an armed post to quiet, silence, and attack anyone in the Arab neighborhood, for it to continue to have control in the area and, of course, serve imperialist interests. So I'm not sure, Beverly, if we as scholars as well as activists can, sort of separate, if you want, academia, from the media and from the government and from all of these official institutions, if you want, because all of them, or put them all together, get much of their funding, whether they like it or not, unfortunately, by big supremacist powers, by the Zionist lobby here, as well as by, those who literally ally with the state of Israel. So our struggle is much more widespread, if you want, and it should really implicate all of these arms that are supporting the academia. So I'm not sure to what extent, as academics, as scholars, even as activists, can change one institution of the so many different institutions that are colliding, okay, in support of imperialism. This is, what I can see around me. So we need to put together more solidarity with Indigenous people, with Black people, with, African Americans, with people of color, and with people globally. Because if you look at what's happening globally, by the way, by the people, and definitely not the governments, okay, it's a huge pouring of, civilians into the streets saying enough of the genocide. These people have been, going through this for a large, for a long, long time, okay? Since before even the establishment of the state of Israel. So enough is enough. And this is the message that should go to the government, to the media, to academia, and because every single academic institution, they're acting exactly the same. There is no difference between Carleton or U of T or anyone. We all remember just recently, was it last year, when 20 of the presidents of Canadian universities went happily ever after with Zionist money to go and visit Israel. It was a shameful act that they did. Of course, we said no to them, we criticized them, but no one is paying any attention to us because their support is structural. Our support needs to be structural in that sense of, counting or going against what is happening right now. Oh, let me end actually with what I wanted to end, but I thought, I used all of my time. I wanted to end with one verse only, actually one line, again from Mahmoud Darwish, where he says in Arabic, على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة. On this land, there is what's worth living. And Palestinians will never leave their land, which Israel wants, the US wants, and the rest of the Western world wants. They want to end the Palestinian case, but they will not be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nala. Courtney, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Nala has said, and I think that I've definitely struggled with this myself as someone who's been, a tried and failed academic, and I'm slowly having colleagues try to pull me back in various ways, as you've seen from my atypical relationships with academics. And for myself, it's been very difficult because I was just reflecting on this earlier too, is that as a young Indigenous woman, I've come up in spaces where a lot of the people that were pointed to as mentors or as thought leaders for Indigenous thought ended up being pretendians and ended up being people that were not even Indigenous to begin with, and were having influence at the highest levels around thinking and policy and in institutions. So it is very disheartening as a young person to think about entering that and dedicating your life to systems that are meant to destroy you and undermine your ability to live. That's basically why I've thrown all my energy into creating Protect the Tract as an alternative to that, of becoming exhausted with that system, both as like an academic, as a workplace, but also as a policymaker, as someone who's worked inside government and worked for national Indigenous organizations, worked internationally. I just thought, what is the point of suffering and having all of this pressure and being bound by institutions that don't care about me, that I'm disposable to and replaceable to. And I'm not replaceable to my family. I'm not replaceable to my community. My nieces rely on me. I'm their only Auntie Courtney. And that meant more to me than, the possibility of what was capable in the institutions. And so it took a long time. It's taken a long time. It's taken 4 or 5 years to really develop into something sustainable. And again, and even then, it wouldn't even be possible without other people who are engaged in the suffering, who are doing that work to leverage, resources from universities to be able to stabilize our organization. So it's really hard. I mean, to me, I've given up and moved on, but I see why so many other people stay as well. And that's why we had that point of like not judging anyone for where they're at or where they think they can affect change, because people that have those values, are affecting change in the way they feel they're most able to. And if people come to the point where they feel like they're not able to affect the change that they want to see and they want other things, then yeah, like the university is not going to miss you, but your family and your community that will, if you end up losing yourself to being able to do this work or being able to exist amongst your people to be able to do anything that's joyful. And I just been reminded by that over and over again by our traditional leaders and our traditional knowledge keepers of just like, a huge part of our culture and our identity is joy and love and caring. And where do we find that? I've had a very difficult time finding that in any university setting. It's only existed in community. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe my pessimistic, nihilistic millennial take.
Thanks, Courtney. AJ?
Thanks, Beverly. Yeah, so I just want to start out by making it clear to folks that each of us, like, we agreed to speak on this panel quite a while ago, and each of us came to talk about Palestine independently because each of us, and we didn't talk about it with each other because it is so important. And I think that says something, that each of us like changed our talks independently. My talk, I didn't have a lot of time. And those few lines about Palestine mean that as someone whose contract likely, like if my contract doesn't get renewed, I know why. And as someone who is looking for a tenure track position, there's one more really big reason why I'm never going to get one. And that this is a situation we have where speaking out against genocide means that you become unhireable, I think indicates very strongly that universities are not reformable. I've been told all along, like, don't speak about Palestine, like long before this, never talk about Palestine until you have tenure. And it's structured in this way of like, that once you have tenure, you can do stuff. And it's designed to like pacify people until they become conservative enough. And then they just sort of remain passive. That's how academic training is designed. Also, there were universities in the 60s, like York and Trent, that sort of were these new institutions that were supposed to be fundamentally different, radical spaces. And we see them now, and they're not different. They're the same. And so I think the structure of the university, the fact that it's thoroughly invested in Eurocentric forms of knowledge and knowledge hierarchies means that no matter what happens, it will replicate into what we have, and fundamentally changing and making more egalitarian forms of sharing information and producing knowledge is what we need to be looking to.
Thanks, AJ. Ronaldo?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Bev. And I would begin by saying that, the new world that we want to make also makes a new university. So, part of what I was saying is that people like us who are gathered here, we really work on the peripheries of the late modern university. We are the kinds of people that the university can adapt enough to include, but it can very quickly contract enough to purge us. And we're literally living with the evidence of that right now, today. So what does that mean for me? That means to me then that, the university is a significant site of struggle. It's not a place where I take refuge. It's not a place where I hide out to do some other kind of important work somewhere else. The university is embroiled in, the kind of political work that I think is absolutely necessary and urgent to be done. Because for each of us sitting down here today, there are about 3 or 4 down the corridor at work who are doing the research, as Gary was pointing to produce the justifications for social abandonment, who are doing the research and making the claims and producing meaning that in 2023 wants many other people to believe that by simply deploying the term decolonization, that you have somehow sided with Hamas terrorists. So we have important work to do inside the university as a site of struggle. We have to understand that the forces that are arrayed against our lives are not just in the domestic armies that we call the police. They're not just in government. They're not just in public education. They are right inside the university. That the late modern university is the central foundational pillar for justifying all of the kinds of violences that we are greeted with, whether those are physical violences or ideological violences. As Sylvia Winter reminds us in her still breathtaking, no human involved essay, she asks us to account for the fact in the university, we train the people who become cops. We train the domestic armies. So what do we do? What do we do with that knowledge? I think that points to the kinds of questions that Gary raised about pedagogy and curriculum and so on. And there's a reason why that Black studies, women's studies, queer studies, all of these kinds of post-1960 studies are under tremendous attack in the university today. You know why? Because they provide people with languages and ideas and meanings that extend beyond the university into the everyday workplaces. So this is why I began by saying, all jobs are sites of struggle and antagonism and so on. The last point, I'm here in Buffalo. I want to end with this little anecdote that I learned, maybe a couple months ago. I live up the street from the first Starbucks in Buffalo to be unionized. And throughout the summer, every couple of Saturdays, they would have information pickets outside the Starbucks. And I was at work and I was talking to a colleague about this. And she said to me, many of the people who work at that Starbucks and who unionize it, did their undergraduate degrees in global gender and sexuality studies here at the University of Buffalo. This is why we're under attack. This is why we have to understand that the very forces of social abandonment are not simply somewhere out there. They're in coordination with what's going on inside of the university. So we should not be surprised then by the absolutely unanimity that exists between our university presidents, politicians, and many others in justifying genocide, war on Palestinians, and generally white supremacist global capitalist colonialism everywhere. We can't be surprised. It functions to help justify that.
Exactly. Thank you. Gary?
Thanks, Beverly. I have a bunch of things to say, so I'll try to be as minimal as I can.
And it's okay. I mean, we do have before you start, I just wanted to just share some there are no questions, but just share some comments that people have sent, including many people are sending solidarity, thanking you for your fantastic talks, absolutely excellent panel, solidarity, love and solidarity, a fantastic and informative discussion, sending love and solidarity from Metropolitan University. Love this discussion. Some people have given their names: Christina Sharp, Sabra Rezai, Sima Bilger, and other people have been sending really positive support for the work, for the labor that you all are doing here this morning. And I wanted to just share that with you. Lots of love and support and gratitude for the conversation this morning to all of you. Thank you. Okay, Gary.
Thanks, Beverly. That's wonderful to hear. I guess the place I wanted to start was, I'm now a retired university professor, but since I retired at Laurentian University, they got rid of a whole bunch of departments. I just wanted to list what some of them were. It was Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. It was Indigenous Studies. It was Labor Studies. I mean, there's a lot more that went on, but just think about that. And that was using mechanisms where they declared the university bankrupt and used forms of procedures that I don't think should actually be used with any sort of public institution. So I just wanted to mention that in terms of the types of departments, the types of programs that they want to go after in really vicious ways. And remember the campaigns against the humanities and the social sciences actually have a much longer history, but now they take on a particular character of being incredibly racist, incredibly colonialist, incredibly sexist, incredibly heterosexist, incredibly transphobic, and more than that, I'm sure. So I just think we should recognize that there's been attacks for a long time on how some of us have been able to use university situations to develop certain contradictions or to open up certain spaces that they found threatening. It is actually, I'll just mention one thing that I think is sort of interesting. Around interdisciplinarity, right? Which I think many of the programs of like women's studies, gender studies, sexuality studies, and so on, were actually constructed as being interdisciplinary. Remember now that also the right wing and forces of neoliberal capitalism are actually opposed to some of the disciplines of knowledge. Because even, and I'll just mention something from sociology that people probably won't entirely grasp, but Emile Durkheim, who was a really conservative sociologist, argued the need for social solidarity. They are opposed to that. They see that as actually threatening, that anyone would actually want to talk seriously about social solidarity. So for me, we have to recognize universities are not on our side, right? They're terrains of struggle. Just like, you know, we were ever dragged into a courtroom, it might become a terrain of struggle, or various other places that we find ourselves in. And in that situation, I think we have to, I'm using John Holloway's expression here, we have to organize within, against, and beyond universities. And I think that's sort of crucial. So yes, we do need to organize within them, because there are actually some students wanting to do some things differently, some faculty wanting to do some things differently, but lots of them who don't, or get, as AJ was mentioning, sort of like sucked into the normalization procedures, the professionalization procedures in the university, where even though they're told they could actually talk about Palestine when they have tenure, they won't do it, right? Because the process of getting tenure has actually meant they've been transformed themselves by the institutional context. So I think we really need to think more about what does against and beyond mean in the university context. And sometimes it actually means, you know, during a strike situation at Laurentian, I took my students to the picket line for them to actually experience what a picket line was about. When the Sudbury Coalition Against Poverty had an occupation of our MP's office, our MPP's office, Rick Bartolucci, more than half of the people who were arrested there in terms of the SCAP 11 were university students, right? To just think about, one of the reasons why the Sudbury Coalition Against Poverty ended up dying was because that pool of university students was no longer really around to do some of this stuff. So to also recognize that beyond the walls of the university, there are things that people are doing that actually relate to beyond and again and against and beyond. But also, like, beyond can mean actually doing other types of forms of education. Like, I mean, when I was much younger, in the early, I guess it would be the 60s, I actually went to some of, no, the 70s. I went to some of the first women's studies organizing at U of T. Someone brought me there, and there were hundreds of people there, right? I mean, and it was not an academic thing at all. It was something about pedagogy and transformation that had different characters. So I think we also need to think about, are there other pedagogical sites and other pedagogical locations we can be using? And remember, being an activist, being an organizer is also a pedagogical experience. We're constantly producing theory and knowledge. It doesn't just happen in the halls of the university. And I think once we sort of understand that, we can actually begin to understand how movement organizing beyond the walls of the university is about counter education, popular education in new ways. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for those comments and those the response to the question. I wanted to just to add a few things, to take up on some of the comments that like AJ made and with regards to the context of the university, and also to draw on things that others have said. The fear that's that's perpetuated among faculty who's attempting to earn tenure, or who are on contract and never being able to get a job, and that people tell you to wait till you are tenured. Well, some of my most unsupportive faculty people are those who are tenured, who are just silent. And I mean, yes, as Gary said, you get caught up in the institutional structures, but then there comes funding, and you're told that you're not supposed to speak up. Then there comes all these merits, as Ronaldo has talked in his, talked about the work of EDI and the way all these various structures and rewards and awards suck us up, that we no longer recognize that our work is supposed to be transformative, or at least that's what we intended in the beginning. And so far, what has happened is that we no longer see that the university is a site or a place where transformation can happen, but it's just working within the structure and system. And I guess my question is that, can we continue to do this? Because what we are witnessing right now is that the university will abandon us no matter what. They will abandon us even when we actually play along. Because we are seeing that particular people in the university, even when they play along, there are moments in time when something happens and they themselves are in jeopardy, right? If they speak up on something, it might just be minor, but it is for either themselves or for others that they may think is worth speaking up, that the university will not protect you. So I'm wondering, I'm thinking what it is then. Where do we then demonstrate? And I know, AJ, many of our faculty who are not tenured are speaking out and are getting attacked for it, as we witness, right? But I'm wondering, what then? It doesn't seem as though we have anything to lose anymore. So therefore, what do we do now? How do we then insist upon taking that space, insist upon speaking up, but also creating a collective community or a collective site of support for each other? I mean, and I mean, this is what Scholar Strike intended to do is to allow, for that kind of conversation to take place, that kind of intellectual activity, that kind of intellectual, space, but also a space of activism and transformation, and where we are able to articulate our, our dissent and our resistance and our refusal to what is happening today. So I'm just going to give everybody the last word to say whatever it is that you want to leave us with, because it's 1:55, and we will have to close. So I'll ask you to leave us with whatever it is that you feel is pertinent to close with, and I'll start with Nala. And I'll just ask you to speak for like, a minute or two, because we're at the end of our time. Thanks.
Okay. For a change, I am not speaking much today. What am I going to say? I want to say that academics and scholars are not the only ones who produce theory or who produce knowledge or who produce,
Absolutely.
Consciousness. We're not the only ones. People
Absolutely.
in the streets are producing, so much effect and import throughout the whole world, and affecting more. I think they're affecting way more people than we are affecting here. We publish a book, they either put it on, on the shelf or maybe read it at one point. It is our activism, as Gary and others have said, outside of academia, that makes us not only resist, but also live.
Yes.
We find our sanity by working together with people like you guys. We find our sanity by working with the people outside who are protesting, who are resisting all forms of, of oppression, including settler colonialism, including racial capitalism, including colonialism, including poverty, including, all forms of oppression that so many sections of our society, our global society is facing. So this is what we are doing. And this is my call, if you want, to women and feminists and anti-colonial, anti-imperialists, activists. Please go out and raise your voice now, not tomorrow. The Palestinians under genocide right now need you, and you should be out with us the same way you are out with other peoples who are looking for their independence.
Thank you. Thanks, Nala. Courtney, let's ask you to make a comment in a minute, if you don't mind, because we are at the end of our session.
Yeah, no problem. I think that, one of the things that I kind of got to the point of is just, and Ronaldo's word struck me too, is just like, there's got to be something better than this. And there's a fear that the work that we do around liberation would then lead to future oppressions or whatever. Like, I hear this a lot, especially as an Indigenous person working in a specific territory. There's a lot of settlers that are thinking like, well, do you want me to, like, I don't have anywhere to go. Like, does this mean you want to eradicate me? Like, all those kinds of fears, right? And it's born out of fear. It's born out of the unknown. And I think that what we're trying to do is talking about creating a catalyst for change and for better and for different, to not repeat the things that have happened historically, but to find and dream and aspire to new things. And I think that's one of the most difficult things that I've had to deal with is to think about even Indigenous youth, right? I know so many Indigenous youth right now are going through academic streams or are doing things that are focused on healing our communities. They're becoming social workers or getting MSWs or nursing or, addictions workers, mental health workers. And it really pains me because we're losing our artists, we're losing our people using their other skills, and our children have lost their ability to just pursue what they're good at, bringing joy, bringing art, bringing vibrancy to our lives and meaning to our lives in different ways. And I think Indigenous children have a right to aspire to more than just healing in their communities, to more than just safety in their communities. And we've continually left that to the, let fear dominate our abilities as the adults in the room and the people that are in the positions of power and control and having influence in this time and day. We've been silent and we've let fear keep us from being bold and making our contributions that we need to while we have the time to do it. And so when we do that, we leave these struggles to burden our children, that these problems are things that are not going to go away. And the more that we are unwilling to have those conversations ourselves and do that work ourselves, the more we leave it to the children in the coming generations who are going to have to deal with not only the crises that we've stuck our heads in the sand over, but the incoming climate apocalypse and all of those other things too, that are going to make their lives tremendously more difficult than ours have been. And that is probably the most shameful reality that I face as a person now who's living. So I do as much as I can and have transformed my life in the best way that I know how to stop feeding into these cycles of systemic violence and try to undo them as best as I can. And I'm not perfect and I haven't done it perfectly, but I've done the best that I can. And I've looked to other people too, to place that challenge on themselves, to think about what more can they do, especially when they occupy positions of power and influence. Yeah.
Thanks, Courtney. AJ, a minute, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. I really appreciate this conversation and I've learned so much. I don't have a lot to close with. One thing I think that is really, which I try to do with my students, and I think would be helpful if we all try and do, is make our students more conscious about how the sausage of the university is made. They are very unaware and often uninterested in the politics of the university that really kind of regulates and controls so much of their learning and their lives. And I think it's important for them to understand how how knowledge is produced and how their social conditions are produced of their learning. And I think also, just to reiterate Gary via John Holloway, or the other way around, that it's really critical that we work in, against, and beyond, and that happen in the university and outside of it, and that those of us who have the privilege to make a choice to not speak up have to recognize that it's unacceptable to make that choice, that the fact that you have that privilege means that you have to use it in speaking up.
Thank you, AJ. Ronaldo.
Yeah, the late modern university was not built for people like us. We only exist in it because otherwise the lie of its democratic openness would be much more exposed. So for me, I come to the university knowing what I need to do, which is to enact my complicated and contradictory relationship to Rastafari, which is to say Babylon has to burn.
Right. Thank you. I think that's evidence. Gary.
Thanks, Beverly. Thanks, Ronaldo. Thanks, everyone.
That was a perfect statement.
Yeah, that was really great. I'll just mention something that may not seem to directly flow from this discussion, but I think it does, which is I think we actually have to recognize that we're actually going through a world historic shift that has earlier roots, that actually means, like what Ronaldo was saying, the left that used to exist is dead, and that we have to actually reimagine, re-envision what our social struggles and how they can be pulled together and made more powerful, how we can do that. And that I'll just leave it there, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary, Kinsman, Nala Abdu, AJ Withers, Ronaldo Walcott, Courtney Sky, or pro bono ASL interpreters, Tim and Selena. And thank you to all who have been following it. Thank you to Jen, our streamers, and to all of our assistants, Justine Bazzi, and other people who have been helping to make so that this teaching could take place. Thank you all, and goodbye, and please keep watching.
Thank you, Beverly.
In solidarity and struggle.